This is not scripted whatsoever. So we're not. So I'll let Andy introduce himself in a second. I'm going to introduce myself, and then we're going to talk about what we're going to talk about. But it's not scripted. Andy has no idea of the questions that I'm going to throw at him, and even I don't know some of the questions I'm going to throw at you, Andy, because it'll all be based upon what your responses are to some of these things.
Yeah, no change there really, is there going?
yeah. The level of preparation for this is, at its usual.
It's my traditional level of preparation, I think.
I think so. Yeah, absolutely. So but first of all, just thanks, Andy, for agreeing to do this, and thanks to everybody else who's joining us to have a listen in, who's booked on. We are going live on YouTube, so welcome to anyone who's watching on YouTube. So I didn't feel a thing, but we're all doing it now. But there you are. It's where all the cool kids are on YouTube. So Andy, could you introduce yourself first of all, please, and give a little bit of history about your career and how you got to where you are, and then I'll do the briefest of intros to me, and then we'll crack on.
Okay. I often like to use the word eclectic. My wife would beautifully describe me as a bit of a geek and a bit of a nerd, which I quite like. I don't mind that. At present, as I'm sure most people are aware, I'm the CEO of a company called Cyberfort, which is something we started about 3.5 years ago. And at its heart is anything to do with data security, data privacy. We've got a lot of weird and wonderful stuff. And obviously within that is a pen testing ethical hacking operation. And my history in that goes back quite a long way, really, back to about 2006 when I joined NCC Group. And at that point, it was primarily an escrow organisation with some other stuff. And I think we took the other stuff and built it up over a few years. And it's now by far the dominant aspect of that organisation. And it's weird because you're dealing with an industry that back then you can see was incredibly early days. It really was just setting off, and it's changed as an industry drastically over that 15-16 year period. And we've kind of grown up with it, which I think is quite cool. So I did that from 2006 to 2010. Then what was really interesting was stepping outside of, and I'll go back prior to that in a sec, but stepping outside of that industry and running an organisation that had nothing to do with IT at all for about 4 years. But that gave me the opportunity, big global listed organisation, 5 billion market cap, I think. But it allowed me a view of how, quote, an ordinary business looks after its security. So I got involved in sitting on sort of taking responsibility at board level for internal stuff. And some of it's quite shocking. And they're not alone, because I've seen it firsthand as well, when you see that actually, yes, it was good 10 years ago, but it wasn't really much of a priority, I would say. And it was very much all about features and products and services and doing things a bit better, and worrying about whether stuff was secure or compliant wasn't necessarily top of the list. So that was a bit of a shock. But it certainly then provided an opportunity to go full circle back into the industry. So if I go back prior to 2006, I actually started off running bingo halls, believe it or not, in the 90s, which is that's a unique experience, and I could do an hour talking about some of the comedy that came out of that, quite frankly. I've still got my tuxedo, my black tie. Did involve singing every Saturday night for about 5 minutes to the audience, which was quite fun. It's obviously an area that you're familiar with.
Yeah.
So I think that was all part of BAS PLC at the time, which was going through a lot of change. And I stepped out of there late 90s and went to a small technology startup. So lived through the ups and downs of the dot-com boom and the two telecom crashes between 08 and 05, 98 to sort of 05, 06. But that again provided quite a strong insight into a small team. There weren't many of us, and most people in there were developers and technical people. And I'm sure we'll touch on those again. But it also gives you an insight to kind of having to change your business model and your operation hugely quickly as the world collapses around you at times. But also a very, very early insight into managing people who are, I wouldn't say difficult, but they know what they want to do, they know how they want to spend their time, incredibly smart people, and that kind of core of really savvy developers who are probably more interested in making something incredibly clever than they are about how commercial it might be, being generous. So, there's a lot of different aspects, and then over the past 4 or 5 years, been involved, and in NCC as well, to be fair, been involved quite heavily in M&A, or mergers and acquisitions, and private equity. And we are a private equity-backed enterprise now. So that started 16, 17, and it's an opportunity to put together what we as an organisation now feel is pretty much just some cool stuff. And cool stuff involves getting your accreditations, getting your people, your capabilities, your physical assets, your locations. And we put a lot of stuff together very, very quickly. But at the heart of all that is our ability to interact with third parties and how we deliver products and services to clients. And that's the thing we try and bang on about constantly. So building the cybersecurity aspect of the group is effectively from scratch. So it was an opportunity, having looked around what was in the market, whether to buy something or not, decided not to, and said, well, here's an opportunity, complete one-off, take a blank sheet of paper and build a pen testing cybersecurity based operation from nothing. It was an idea of a bit of paper, that part of the group 2 or 3 years ago, and is now fully established, has all its badges, has its accreditations, fast-growing team, fast-growing client base, and everybody within there is very proud of what they have built, because all I did was put the framework in effectively, but the guys there day to day did a fantastic job. So a bit of a roller coaster over sort of 15, 20-year period, but I think the key point is that growing up with it. It's an industry that didn't really exist at all 20 years ago. Mm. And is probably one of the biggest, fastest growing industries over the next 20 years is going to be.
Yeah, no, that's really interesting. And it's by way of introduction on me, it's sort of very similar to yours in as much as being involved in the industry for about 20 years in truth as it currently looks today, how it operates. So I think certainly I've got some understanding of your background. Interesting that you mentioned bingo halls. I'm going to have to come back to you on that, maybe on a separate session sometime. Your background around that. Any photographic evidence of you wearing the tuxedo?
Plenty, and some video stuff as well. Yeah, that's actually just moved on as well, I'll tell you. Because,
But when I left school, I wanted to be in IT. I wanted to be a hacker. I've seen the movies and such. The few that were around at the time. That was a long time ago. I openly admit that and recognize that. But it's interesting because you mentioned the words earlier. It's cool stuff. So this is an interview with a hacker, and in particular, a kingpin. That's kind of the phrase we're going to be using. So you should be sat there really in a chair stroking a cat.
He's around somewhere. So
that's how it should be. This is an interview with a master criminal, because as we know in cybercrime today, it is, yes, there's lots of tools being used and automation being used to carry out cybercrime and hacking and such like. But it's a business, isn't it? It's now moved from fringes of, although you could say it's still on the fringe of society, but it's not from the fringes of business. It's a true business sector, earning multi-millions, multi-billions for these people who carry out these things. And at the top of this, there is a kingpin. There is someone out there recruiting and setting things up. So when a cyber criminal, or when you're looking to hire hackers, and because you hire ethical hackers, what kind of skills are you looking for?
I think we try and approach it slightly differently, in the sense that I try and hire people who are consultants first and very good at the cool stuff second. And there's a number of reasons for that. And I think, again, it goes back to building the business from scratch. We try and sell and interact and play on the fact that it's, it's just a high quality experience that you have dealing with us, and that goes all the way through from your first interaction to your very last interaction, which may then repeat the next year or not, or what have you. But we really do try and go above and beyond, and a big part of that is how you interact. So one of the things that's always been interesting in the industry is the output of the stuff that goes on. Fundamentally, people will say, "Oh, you just get a report," and that's kind of true. You know, the only physical manifestation that you get is a PDF, or however it may happen to be delivered. But actually, we try and put that to one side and say, no, it's your whole journey of how it's scheduled, how it's scoped, and how things are talked through. We put a huge amount of effort into the report itself, by which I mean, the people that are in there and myself have seen probably a report from everybody that's ever been produced in the industry, and they've all got good and bad points. So it's like, well, again, what would we see as the perfect report? And we've also got the advantage of being backed by people who are hugely clever, but technically, let's be polite, it's not their bag, right? They work in private equity and M&A and all that kind of stuff. So we were able to, almost dummy run a load of stuff and say, right, if this is going to someone, and changes in legislation have changed massively here, I remember. So in a sort of a post-GDPR world, I say quite often what that did for us is make responsibility personal at a board level. So a report now is something that, you have a CEO or an MD and then an FD and then somebody in IT and then somebody possibly doing security. And very occasionally, they might be asked about it, or it might be raised as a board item, but it wouldn't be particularly. And then there was a massive leap overnight where suddenly I saw examples of actual pen test reports being handed round at board tables, right? And you've got 5 or 6 people haven't got a bloody clue what it's telling them, what it says, what it's for. It's just got a big red splat on the front of it going, "You've got a problem, mate, and if you get fined, you're in trouble. You could get banged up." So there was that immediate bridge of stuff. So we go massively overboard on the management summary, if you like. This is the layman's terms explanation of what it is that we found and what you need to do and why it matters. There's a big difference between what we've found and why what we've found matters, and what it means to you and what you really should do about it. And it's when we're hiring people, it's about people that actually do that. You can be the most technical, amazing person in the world, but if you can't articulate that in a verbally or written in a report and speak to the client and talk them through it, that's a gap, to my mind, anyway. And it goes back to the point I was talking about with the developers earlier. When we had a team of software developers, I learned very quickly that if we just left them alone for a week, you'd come back and they would have built you something that was technically absolutely brilliant, but commercially pointless. Didn't sell anything, couldn't do with it, but my God, it was clever. And you've got to bring all that kind of stuff together. And I think in the team that we have and the people we try and hire, they are genuinely all-round consultants. I'd be very happy, and we do, for them to be stood in front of virtually or physically the client and talking them through it and engaging you. And quite often time you wouldn't be able to separate them from the salespeople.
No, it's an interesting one, and I think you're right. I think there is that difference between when we started out in this sector, this industry 20 years ago. We had very technical people who could almost speak binary, and you would never let them out of the comms room, because to put them in front of a boardroom would be almost professional suicide. Compared to where we are today, I think that journey is, it was very necessary. But as you said, to be able to stand in front of a board and not just to say these are the technical vulnerabilities that we've identified and these are the risks, but it's the so what, isn't it? It's that so what, you've got to be able to articulate that in not just terms that the IT guys can get, but also that the finance director understands it and the head of HR and the marketing understand those things. And I think that's the difference I've certainly seen over the 20 years of hackers becoming more commercially minded, and indeed cyber criminals. I want to keep bringing it back to it. Cyber criminals have become far more commercially minded than they were 20 years ago.
Yeah, that is an absolute industry in of itself, right? And I have, again, things I will say quite often, I have a begrudging admiration for certain aspects of it. Ransomware is the best and most efficient franchise that's out there right now. It's absolutely brilliant from a business perspective. You take the legalities out of it, the way that it operates is quite genius, you know. And you know, I've looked into it, and you know, it's not too difficult, shall we say, to create an identity and get yourself an account and do all this kind of stuff. And there's things that you get I think are fascinating. So you know, again, you don't need any technical capability. You can go on, you can sign up. You get a wizard and a GUI. You can put in your targets. You get all manner of advice. There's online chat help rooms where you can share tips and ideas. You get an SLA, which I think is fascinating, to guarantee that this dodgy bit of kit that you're using is going to be up 99.9% of the time. And my particular favourite is you get access to a pricing analyst. I love that. Right? What's the tipping point of this organisation? How much are they likely to pay in order to release the data? And they every time, you know, this is building up a huge amount of intelligence and background, and it's separate the data by industry, by scale, by all this manner of stuff, and profile it and say, right, you should charge that much. That's your best chance. You know, this is proper business analysis that's going on behind all this stuff.
Yeah, no, absolutely, and I think that's the interesting aspect of this. And again, this is why it's interesting to have you on here to give you your business thoughts around this, and you know how it's structured. Because I recall a cybercrime police officer once saying to me, you know, Gary, do you know what a kingpin looks like? Do you know what someone looks like who runs this kind of organization? And I said, no, I've no idea. And they said, well, it's somebody who has been in the industry a long time, understands the cool stuff, understands how to recruit people, you know, understands what motivates people, understands the business aspects of criminality and technology, and can orchestrate it and can structure this. And I think that, to be taking away the cybercrime or the criminal element, that sounds like a CEO. That's somebody who is thinking about, you know, the commerciality, thinking about the pricing structure, thinking about the clients and the customers. So that, you know, the reason why I thought it would be we thought it would be interesting to interview you is, you know, if you were put into that world of running a criminal organization, you know, and hiring these kind of people, the kind of skills that you just talked about there. You talked about knowing the cool stuff. You talked about having that commercial mindset. My next question really is, why do you think people get into this? Why do you think do people become either hackers or then move into cybercrime? Why do you think that happens?
There's two separate questions there, right? I'll do them backwards. The leap from the black and the white side, I think, is probably just inherent in the individual. That's, as much as anything, is just a bit of a moral compass, or does everybody have a price? That's not necessarily a technical point, is it? That's more about what would it take to make this person jump over. You said before, correctly, that in many ways they're two sides of the same coin in terms of a business operation and a setup. Well, you also use the word motivation. Now, there's lots of discussions about that, and I have lots of chats about that. Well, what motivates people day to day, right? And that's a little bit of a black art, and it's taken me kind of 20 years to try and get my head around it, because it is a different kind of psychology, and very rarely is it just a question of, well, you know, you have to pay them X, Y, or Z, or so and so is offering them more than that, and blah blah blah. There's a small aspect of it, but I've never been convinced that's kind of the main driver. So you know, we recently, for example, did our mission statement, our vision, and our values as a group. Once we completed all the bits and completed our sort of capability, and we threw it out to all of the employees about what our values should be, because we want everybody to partake in it. And people don't believe it; they'll just think it's a paper exercise and all this kind of stuff. And the guys in that part of the group were the most vociferous in terms of taking part in that debate. And there is no way they were not going to let me have curiosity as one of those four, right? No way. I mean, to the point that it was getting locked in the room and being hammered about it. So that drives why curiosity is one of the four values of Cyberfort as an entity. And that going through that exercise was just a manifestation of why, you know, they are what they are, and they work how they work. It's just, you know, it's a great single word summary of what they do on a daily basis. And day by daily, I mean, kind of 24 hours, as we all know, it doesn't start at 8 or 9 and finish at 5 or 6. It's a mindset of wanting to know why that thing is how it is, and why did you build it like that? Why have you left this gaping, flipping hole in it? And why is this and why is that? You know, as you know, I have a 2-year-old child, yeah, and not that I'm comparing them completely like for like, but there is a little bit of that why when it starts to go that just never goes away with some people. It never goes away. You don't accept what you're told. I think it is a good part of it.
Yeah, well, it's an interesting one actually, because you're absolutely right in terms of the curiosity side of it, and I've used that phrase before, that it's a mindset. You know, once a hacker, always a hacker, because you're looking to you know you're asking those questions, the 5 whys. It's that Japanese discipline of asking why 5 times that ultimately will lead you down to the truth, the core of the.
But if only people stopped at 5, but yeah.
Yeah, that's kids for you. But yeah, I think you're absolutely right. The curiosity is a core, as you say, a value. You know, it's a curiosity that never leaves you, wanting to understand and wanting to learn more. Why does it work that way? How can I stop it working that way and make it do something completely different? That mindset, I think, never changes. Do you think there's other reasons why, what other things that motivate cyber criminals though, and hackers? Not specifically the good guys, our guys, but I'm thinking just in general terms. Do you think there are other reasons?
Yeah, I mean, there is. I think the basket of stuff, to be honest, is probably the same. I think it's the emphasis that's different, and that's what puts you in one camp or another. So, you know, there's no doubt about it that you know, there's potentially much more lucrative rewards to be made by being on the criminal side, right? And then you take a view on what level of risk that comes with, and, you know, how prepared you are and all that kind of stuff.
I think it is also a game, though, isn't it? I mean, you know, we when we come across cyber criminals, the bad guys that are out there, and sometimes you find out that cyber criminal is a 14-year-old, typically a lad. You know, if we're going to go with that, the stereotype, but it is, generally speaking, it's male orientated, and it typically is someone aged, or at least last time they did any kind of stats around this, anything from 12 years old up to 17 years old tends to be that sort of area where they start to flex their technology knowledge and curiosity. But it tends to be that sort of they're just getting into it. They're doing it because it's they're doing it for lulz, aren't they? You know, that old term. They're doing it for a laugh. They're doing it because they see it as a game. They see it as
it's mischief and notoriety.
Yeah,
kind of bracket, right? Can I do it? The curiosity thing, and what does this do? And oh yeah, this would be kind of fun. Blah blah blah. But yeah, I've always said that notoriety is a huge thing on that side. It's being the person that did. Actually, to be fair, it's on both sides. But it is, you know, being the person that did that, or did this, or did the other, whatever handle you're using. You know, that's kind of a cool thing. But you can't necessarily monetize a lot of that. You know, that's a different aspect. If we're talking about your structured cybercrime industry, I think you're up to a different level there. You're up to people they've probably been through that phase, they're out of that phase, they're on the other side, and it is a full-blown career at that point, and they've made that decision that that's going to be their career. And I think geography comes into this lot as well, right? So it's a global virtual world. This stuff more than anything. I have a policy right now, for example, that you know, we are part of our, you go back to your other question, part of our recruitment is very heavily based on, slightly difficult right now, on meeting the individual, spending time with the individual, getting them to kind of make the team, be part of it, and this kind of the other. Whereas it's very much more skills for hire on the other side, right? You could be based anywhere in the world, just prove you can do something, where's your Bitcoin account, all this kind of stuff. So that geography, I think, plays quite a big part in it.
Yeah, I would agree, and we just had an excellent comment, and I was going to come to this point actually, because when you were talking about earlier about the white hats and going into the black hats side of things, quite often when people are starting to again explore this curiosity, this new world, and they become notorious, oh, look what I can do, and it's great, and it's a bit of ego, and that's when it becomes a bit of a problem, because then you go onto the radar of the cyber criminal kingpins or the recruiters that are out there that say, hey, if you could do that skill, have you thought about doing this? Have you tried this? Because it's just a game, and see if you can actually, can you hack into these, or have you thought about launching this kind of attack, or can you use this tool to do this? That almost that slippery slope into the dark side. When I do talks at schools, I often use the analogy of Jedi and the dark side of the Force, and I say, it's very compelling. It's very easy to be compelled, to turn to the dark side of the Force, because it's where you can work, you can play with your ego, etc., or you can explore that side of things. I think that's a real problem. I think that I don't think it's explored. I don't think it's talked about in schools enough. I don't know what your thoughts are around that, but I think it's becoming almost easier for cyber criminal kingpins. And I keep kind of doing that to you, but I know you're not a kingpin, but you get what I mean. That it's almost becoming easier to be able to recruit people.
It's easy to access them because of the joy of social media apps these days, which didn't exist 10 years ago.
Yeah.
The next greatest app is only always just around the corner. You can attempt to put all the physical and parenting type of controls that you want in, but it won't work. So, all manner of weird and fun stuff goes on these apps. We kind of know that.
Yeah, and it's interesting that certainly when I first started going into IT and into hacking and cybercrime, the term script kiddies was a real insult to anybody who was, if someone said, oh, this guy is just a script kiddie, meaning somebody who was originally meaning somebody who is just using somebody else's tool. They've got a GUI, if it was available at the time, and didn't really understand the underlying architecture. Today, I think we're in a different place. 20 years later, where we are now, a script kiddie is just somebody who just uses somebody else's tools, and it's not seen quite as as much as a derogatory term, I don't think, because there's so many script kiddies out there, aren't there? There's so many people, as you say, just using other tools that are being franchised, created by people to be able to utilize.
Yeah, the tool thing's always an interesting debate. And I get drawn into a lot of conversations about people always saying, oh, well, ultimately all pen testing will just be automated. Right. I'm like, I don't buy that.
No.
And arguably right now, a lot of it already is.
Yeah.
That isn't the skill, right? These guys are hugely talented. We have a bit of fun always with, right now, for example, what we do, we're rolling out a standard laptop build for all manner of good reasons across the group. Not including these guys, it's a complete waste of time, right? Just like you guys just go and do what you want, build your own. They need a specific type of machine, but then they also have their own preferred, tools and operations and ways of doing stuff. So every hacker will build their own laptop very individually and will load stuff on it that they like to use. But then that's that gives them a platform. But then it's how you use it, right? And that may do 80% of the job, but that extra 20% is just up here. And some people can just do it and some people can't. And I'm not a huge fan of this is why this plays into the recruitment and the interview process as well. So that's changed hugely. The interview processes now pretty much across the board are completely sit down, show us what you can do is part of it. Because you can read all the books and you can go on all the university courses and you can watch all the YouTube videos, and it means you will talk a bloody good game and you'll have some kind of relatively low level initials after your name that show that you've done some of that. And that may get you through a first phase of an interview process. But it's very easy to say within 5 minutes of here you go, find all the crap that we've hidden in this platform, and that just rumbles people really quickly. So that tool versus actual inherent ability in nous, I think you can't automate that.
Yeah, but I think that's where the script kiddies and the modern script kiddie is quite dangerous, because, as you said, passing that first interview stage, and I'm going to keep bringing it back to being a cyber criminal here. So as a kingpin, if I'm recruiting somebody, I'm going to do exactly the same process as you just described, which I'm going to, ask them to describe how they've done something, and they might show me some scripts, and they might show me some tools that they've used to carry out some attacks. But then the next phase, as you rightly said, is then you're going to put them to a test. Then you're going to say to them, right, well, see if you can hack into this organization. See if you can carry out this particular, can you write a particular piece of code that allows me to infiltrate, iPhones or, whatever the system that I'm particularly maybe have in mind of wanting to attack. I think that for me is where today's the modern script kiddie, I don't know why I did that, but the modern script kiddie is more dangerous than it was 20
years ago. Going back to the ransomware point, Gary, that's why the franchise model on certain things works, because there are a proliferation of people and a generation now that by default is technically capable. It's born technically capable. It's raised technically capable, which means that going online, creating an account, getting access, and knowing how to instinctively, bear in mind that because it's a huge amount of money goes into these things, these sort of illegal franchise operations are very easy to use. There's probably millions of pounds gone into developing the platforms that they operate on. So, self-serve and signing up and using the interface is second nature. Anybody's going to be able to do it. So you've got an inherent army of people who fundamentally are the ones carrying the risk, and then the cash trickles up to the top of the pyramid. Right?
So where do you think this is all heading? Do you think, and we were talking a few minutes ago before everyone came online, we were talking about the devices that we put into our homes, the good old Internet of Things, the smart tech that is out there. What do you think the next step is for cybercrime?
That's really hard to answer. I don't think there'll be a massive step change. It's the pace of it. And there is an inherent danger that people, we've been saying this for years, that people just don't give it a second thought. They just connect stuff, random, pointless stuff for no reason. Why the hell do you need your kettle connected to the internet? Why the hell do you need your toothbrush or your fridge, right? But it's just, people just don't even give a toss. It's, no, we'll just connect that. Why? Because we can. Crack on, no fun with that. And that again is a generational thing, which I think will only get worse, but it will get worse and get better. So I have a bit of a theory that the weakest generation right now is the one that is currently aged, I don't know, I guess sort of 15 to 25. I think they've got a problem because they've gone through that phase and age potentially where they've left all manner of weird crap all over the net. They didn't give it a second thought, and you can't now delete it, particularly unless you want to go through the EU GDPR regulations and all that kind of stuff. But the new generation coming through below that, and I know you do a lot of stuff in schools, and we know a lot of people that do a lot in schools, and I'm trying to drill it into my little ones at home as much as I can when it becomes relevant, is that you do give it a second thought, right? And you can almost point to examples to say, look, I'm not being funny, but we've all seen the comedy stuff about the silly emails that people have had in the past, which you can still uncover, and people used to put them on their CV when applying for a job, crazy stuff. But I worry for a certain generation that didn't give security, privacy, compliance, reputation, online image a second thought, and he's now realizing it's too late. But the generation coming through is going, well, why? Getting back to some of the why stuff. Well, why does that need to be connected? Why should I do this? And I'll be taught in turn, actually, because it's potentially serious. So that education is now in place, whereas it wasn't for a certain age group.
No, it's real. That's a really interesting point, as you say, from a social economic perspective. As you say, there's going to be that those coming through schools and universities now just leaving that would, as you said, they've got data everywhere and they're not really thought about privacy in any kind of depth. And again, I'm going to keep on flipping it back to the cyber criminals, because they're going to say that's boon time. You know, we hear about these data breaches all the time, you know, and big data, again, you know, that wonderful phrase that's thrown around quite a lot, you know, that being able to monetize how we use technology and how we're using these devices that we're sticking in our homes without any real thought. I think
it'll keep going up. More and more stuff will get, you know, connected on a daily basis. Everything will become pretty mainstream. I mean, you know, the chat we were having earlier is I did finally relent in lockdown 1 and allowed a smart speaker into my phone, into my house, which then instantly became, well, if you're going to let one in, sod it. So then overnight, pretty much connected everything. Well, there you go. But at least I've got, you know, a degree of control and I know where the off switch is.
Yeah.
By off switch, you know, I don't mean the off switch on the device. I mean the plug.
Yeah. But you also, but this is it. It's about being risk aware, isn't it? And that's part of the problem. Is you know, cyber crime is on the increase. There's no doubt about that. You can read any report you want to read, take any source you like, talk about any statistic, but cyber crime is on the increase. Yeah. The reason for that is because of all the devices we're putting into our homes. My concern is that we've got people who aren't aware of the risks and therefore are risk blind or risk naive. And therefore, you know, they're putting the devices in their homes, which, let's be honest, that security is not their principal concern, is it?
No. In fact, the opposite is true. The opposite is true. And I think what I've seen, interestingly, is a big rise in awareness of what goes on behind the scenes, right?
Like what?
But by which I mean people are no longer surprised when something they were talking about in their house 4 hours ago then appears as a sponsored ad on a feed on an app on their phone, right? So, you know, oh my God, look, what a coincidence! I was just talking about that, right? Yeah, okay. And suddenly, you know, you mentioned, well, how the hell did that get it? Because it's all the same flipping thing at the back end. They're all buying and selling everything off each other on a constant basis, and all under the guise of making life easy for you, supplying you with the stuff that you want. That for me is the danger, but the awareness of that, I think, is creeping up quite heavily. So, you know, your TV is always listening to you. Your speaker is always listening to you. So don't be surprised when it then pops up as a sponsored ad on your Facebook feed. It's just you're being constantly harvested. And some people are kind of cool with that and kind of comfortable because it means they get the stuff that they want. For a lot of people, that's a bit freakish. Yeah.
In terms of that proliferation of devices and such, I'm with you. I think we're leaving ourselves wide open for what's going to come next. And as you say, I don't think we're going to see a step change. I just think it is more about that monetization of data. And I think that's either from a cyber criminal, you know, the bad guys out there, or, you know, the big multinational organizations, the Googles, the Facebooks and the Amazons of the world, who are collecting swathes of information about us and then being able to use that against us. And when I say against us, obviously those kind of guys would say, well, we're using it for you to enhance your shopping experience or to predict, you know, something that is going to help you in your life. You bought all these devices, Andy, so therefore here's some other devices that you might be interested in. I think that's the where we're headed. But my concern, coming back to the cyber criminals, is how are they going to monetize? What is that next step? I've got a suspicion, and I don't even want to talk about it on here because I think I know where this is headed. Because I don't want to give anyone any ideas, but genuinely, because I've thought about it, because that's been part of my job for a long time, is thinking of the work, you know, what is that horizon scan look like? What is coming up over the horizon that's going to come and bite us? And I've got a feeling I know what it is. And I'd be interested from your perspective, thinking about the evolution of cybercrime, thinking about the next steps. If you were, if you were running an organization that was making use of ransomware and such, what do you think is the next step? Where do you think this is going?
I mean, it depends if you're viewing it purely in a financial view. That will continue to evolve. I think everyone's bigger fear is that it's much more geopolitical than that. And yes, it's particularly topical right now, of course. It is into the ability to influence political activity and all that kind of stuff, which in many ways is far more valuable than Bitcoin or pounds and pence or dollars or whatever your currency is. Actually gaining influence and or control is the natural next step for anything of that ilk, right? Because then you are in a position to perpetuate, to influence laws, to influence individuals, to influence whatever it might be. So that I think is the bigger debate, and you're into a whole new realm there. But ultimately, I would have thought that is where everything goes. It's about control, isn't it? Which is a great thing to say on lockdown 2 day as well. Right?
Yeah, absolutely. No, it is, as you say, it's
a bit into conspiracies and into dystopian futures and all this kind of stuff. But you can easily put a dark spin on stuff and saying, well, this whole realm of modern data and modern control and cybercrime is well, what's the potential outcome right now? Well, everybody just stays in their home being supplied with the things that we want to supply them with. And by the way, we're listening and watching everything that you're doing while you're locked in your little cage for the next 10 years. Do as you call little citizen. Right? I'm sure lots of people are doing films and books and all manner of stuff right now. But you can see where it could go.
Yeah, I think that this is it's a fascinating topic, and you said the words there, geopolitical.
You can connect to your fridge, granted, but
yeah. Well, if people know what's the contents of your fridge, then they're going to know the contents of your stomach. They're going to know your health levels, and then again, that data is going to be used because of GDPR, because of that wonderful legislation, that regulation that we have. I think the thing that I think is quite interesting, and I've started to think about this more over the recent months, is we're almost having to redefine cybercrime to some degree, because cyber criminals have become, I'm not going to say mainstream, but they have evolved to such a point where it is a true business structure with financiers. There are lawyers, there are money mules, there are foot soldiers out there, there are generals out there recruiting, there are recruiters, and then you have your kingpins and such. It's the blurring of cybercrime into things like, I'm going to pick on Facebook because it's an obvious one, but when Facebook is continually and Google are continually flouting the rules and regulations around data use and how they're monetizing us, then they are cyber criminals, because they are breaking the law and they're using cyber for it. So they're, who the bad guys are, who the good guys are, is I think is changing.
They're data companies, they're data organizations. But
data mining. I mean, again, that phrase has been used quite a lot over the years. We're mining data, and we're data miners, or we're data aggregators. And every time I hear someone say that, I always go, so it's my data, it's me that you're mining. And it's, I think people forget that. I think that's the bit that for the longest time people haven't really associated data to equals people.
Yeah, again, that's changing a bit, but absolutely correct. Going back 10 years, that nobody would give that a second thought. This thing's free, I get to use it, fantastic.
Yeah. But also the people, 10 years ago, if someone lost a laptop, that was a big deal, wasn't it? It was like, what assets do you have? We have 5 laptops, and that's really, those assets, because the laptop was, 10 years ago, it was £3,000-4,000. Now you can pick up a laptop, for a few £100, but it's not the laptop is the people have stopped seeing just the laptop as the asset, but it's the data that sits upon it. I think that's now people, like you say, people are starting to think differently.
Yeah, and you know, that's where you also wander into other debates. I always find the stuff on state-sponsored hacking quite fascinating, and how much of that isn't going on, and how much of that isn't even denied, for example. And what are they after there? Fundamentally IPR. You know, why spend however much time, effort, resources, and years building something clever where you can just nick the virtual blueprints from somebody else that's already done it? So that in of itself is hugely valuable. But fundamentally, it's still data of a type, isn't it?
So I think, you know, we're coming up towards the last part of this now, which you know, again, I'm going to urge anybody else who has any questions, please do throw some in. It would be interesting to get some curveballs for Andy to answer. So we'll see if anyone throws any in. But I think you're right. That next step from a kingpin in cybercrime, I think it is almost that next step is stepping into, I've got all of this data, you know, I've got 4 billion pieces of data from across the dark web, and I can use that actually to alter the outcome of an election. I can use it for these other purposes. So it suddenly becomes the cyber criminal, as I said, is stepping out of the shadows as a kingpin on doing ransomware and, you know, malicious attacks, to almost into the same fringes of Google and Facebook. Maybe that's where we're headed.
It wouldn't surprise me. It ultimately gives you an opportunity to legitimize, you know, the path, and then wipe it clean. It's a little bit, you know, it's almost the data equivalent of money laundering, right? Where to the outside world, you're an estate agent on a posh road in London, right? You go through the red door at the back of the shop, and there's all manner of, you know, that's where your drug dens are and all this kind of stuff. It's the data equivalent, but actually to the outside world, it would be very easy to legitimize yourself as a, I don't know, as a politician or as a, you know, an entrepreneur, and whatever it might be, and put enough of a front on it so that the, you know, the back end doesn't even, well, let's say it's not visible. By that stage, it probably doesn't exist because you don't need it anymore because you're on the other side. So it's a means to an end in that respect.
Yeah,
it'll end up on that inevitable path to, you know, it's a power and influence thing, right? You're outside of the realms of cash to a degree.
Yeah,
that kind of stuff. You know, again, you can go down wormholes and all manner of stuff.
well, we unfortunately don't have time to go down the wormholes, but I am going to ask, so that we can finish on a bit of more of a positive, I guess, is if we are going to beat the cybercrime and the cyber criminals and the kingpins that are out there, remembering that these guys are now highly organized and such, like, you know, what should we be doing if you were talking to the boardroom, because you sit in the boardroom often, what would you suggest that people need to think about or do?
I think we've always said we're still at a stage where just doing the basics right is still the key, right? Yes, it's an industry that can look incredibly cool, and you can see all the, you know, the films and the images and all that kind of stuff. But there are still very, very few what you would call really, really clever attacks or exploits or hacks or whatever. Most of the stuff still comes down to, you know, poor process, poor patching, poor basics, poor this. So if you do those handful of basic stuff, get all your patching stuff sorted, make sure your processes are in place, get yourself a 27001 accreditation, get yourself a pen test, you're gonna be probably okay, right? You're probably gonna be okay. If somebody's really got it in for you, you ain't gonna see it coming anyway. So, you know, the classics of a begrudged current or ex-employee or all this other kind of stuff, or, you know, just being collateral damage, as is often the case in a huge attack. So it's, you know, but most people still just don't do the basics, and a lot of that is down to cost. sometimes, and someone, particularly a small business, and a small business right now has got it's not a great place to be. Right, it's a struggle in a a pandemic hit economy, which has got all manner of crap going on around it. The worry is that doing the basics becomes discretionary, and if you're not doing the basics because for obvious and understandable reasons, your business survival, for example, is pretty high on the list, then you're at risk of being wiped out by something else. So you're exposing a vulnerability for whatever reason because it's not a priority. But in normal times, you can go to that word. Get the basics right, get the basics done. I don't think that will ever change. I don't think that will ever change. The cyber industry is, I think it's keeping pace with the other side of stuff. It often referred to, I don't particularly like the phrase, but it's always been called an arms race. That you've just got to keep on the level or keep one step ahead or even one step behind is probably okay. There's a lot of very, very smart technology and organisations and businesses in the UK and around the world that you can go to, but you still need to go to them, and you still need to do the implementation and take it a bit seriously. So, I don't think there's anything much beyond that. Because when I do get into other boardrooms of larger or smaller organisations, what used to really, and I've got a presentation that I do at some conferences now and again, is I go in and ask a few very, very simple questions on day one and stage one. And the first question I always ask is, well, who's responsible for the security of the data in your organisation? And you can tell from that one answer what the next question needs to be and what the path needs to be. And it's changing a bit now again, but what I used to get more often than anything else in answer to that was complete silence. Because nobody knew. Right? You'll get a cliched answer, which is true, which is actually everybody is, and ultimately that is true. That is the end game. But traditionally, you would get either complete silence or at least three people pointing at each other, like that. Yeah,
interesting. Well, thank you for that.
It would be that what you all are now, which is great. You're now taking it seriously.
Yeah.
But it's got to be owned. It's got to be owned by everybody, but it's got to be owned at a board level. And somebody, it kind of doesn't matter who it is to an extent, as long as somebody is there as the go-to person. Makes me laugh when you go back to the reasons I never understood. If you go back to sort of 80s and 90s to a degree, IT always sat under your finance director. That was the corporate model. Right. Yeah. So the bloke whose fundamental mindset and way of operating is to save money is looking after the IT department, and therefore anything to do with security moving forwards. I'm not sure that works for me.
Well, that's an interesting point, and hopefully anybody who's watching or listening in will take that piece of advice and go back to look at their own functions and their own business and see where information security sits, who is responsible for it, and in using GDPR language, the seventh principle, who is accountable for data protection and info security. But I think you're absolutely right, and it's a good way of finishing really is get the basics right, and as you said, put security on the agenda before it becomes the agenda, I think is a nice way to summarize it really. And if you are stuck, come and talk to Cyberfort, come and talk to us about it. I think it's, or talk to other people about what are those basic steps, and hopefully then you won't fall into the clutches of an evil mastermind cyber kingpin that looks a lot like Andy.
Yeah, with a cat.
With a cat, absolutely.
He did walk past, but I couldn't get him. But there you go.
Right. Well, I'm going to thank everyone for watching, for sending in a few questions as well. So that is appreciated. Hopefully that's been of interest and of use. Do send emails in to Jenna and let her know about what you thought was interesting or not interesting, if there's something that you'd like to explore in more detail, I'm sure Andy would be more than happy to come back and explore any of the topics that we've covered on a later chat. But until then, Andy, thanks ever so much for your time. Thanks, everybody. And stay well, stay safe, stay connected in lockdown 2.0, and we'll see you on the other side.
Thanks, Gary.
Thanks very much, guys. All the best.